Crash the Bus is a remarkable story about a high-rolling city banker who one day, out of the blue, with no warning at all, has the most extraordinary experience. I won't go completely into that now, obviously, because that would give the book away, but after the experience, it's so powerful, the values inherent in that experience are so powerful, he has to give up his job in the city. He leaves his wife. He has a sort of nervous breakdown, really, because he can't reconcile his former life with the values of the experience he's had. And he leaves his wife, as I say, but then eventually he recovers. He goes back to his wife. She falls pregnant. I don't know if falls is the right word to use, but you know what I mean. And he has to get a job. He can't go back to the city. He ends up seeing that advert on the back of the bus, earn £500 a week with overtime. So he thinks, how hard can it be? And he learns to drive a double-decker bus back through the same terrain of the square mile, picking up his old boss, his old colleagues from time to time in the city. And Crash the Bus really details, as a sort of modern Pilgrim's Progress, detailing a sort of decline and fall, but a redemption again, using London as the sort of backdrop, modern London as the backdrop. And after all, who amongst us hasn't sort of travelled on a bus at some stage? We all know the sort of grinding experience it is. And for this guy to endure the heights of city life and then the lows of driving this London bus and the adventures he has on the way, the people he has to deal with, it's a hell of a story. Well, the inspiration behind it, as I say, the story is 95% based on fact. And I joke at the front of the book that the other 5% is more reliable, but it's 95% a true story told to me by a very good friend of mine. At the time he told it to me, he was my web designer, but as I say, we went on to become very close friends. And it was an experience he'd actually had. And he didn't think much of it at the time. And he said, oh, well, you know, I just did this and I was earning shed loads in the city and then I had to give it all up. I said, well, why? He told me this experience. And I said, well, what did you do after that? He said, well, I drove a London bus. I said, what? I said, what was that like? He said, well, it was pretty terrible, actually. I had some pretty awful experiences on it, including some of the wonderful tales that we tell on Crash the Bus. So it is, as they say, based on true events, and any similarity to persons living or dead is not coincidental at all. In a way, it's, well, I think the blurb on the back says, I've got one here actually, which I'll just read. It's sort of part novel, part scatological comedy, part tragic history, part philosophy, part farce. But it's essentially in the form of a novel, and yet it has occasional philosophical digressions, and I don't think it needs to be classified in a way. It is what it is. It's a book. It measures 6 inches by 9. It will hold the reader's attention. It's funny, it's sad. I hope it's intelligent and elegantly written. It contains aspects of all those things, tragedy, comedy, as I said, because I suppose that's the sort of person I am. It's certainly the nature of the story of Crash the Bus, which is tragicomical, and contains all the elements that make up a human being. And so in a way it's not classifiable. Yes, it's a novel, but it's also a philosophical boxing match. It's a bus journey itself through the cityscape of modern urban experience. It's all these things, and I hope it will appeal to the sensibility of the reader, which themselves is going to be sort of multifaceted. Yeah, the story has a kind of parallel narrative. I don't want to get too poncy about that. What I mean is that the story is told in the present tense because actually there was a stage at which my friend, the bus driver, was driving his double-decker bus away from a bomb scare in London, and so that's told in the first-person present narrative, and then it cuts away to the background, to how he got the job, his fall from grace into the city, and his learning to drive the bus, and so there's this constant, I hope, very interesting, electrifying polarity between the present tense of driving the bus away from the bomb scare and the background story to it. So there's a sort of past, present, and towards the end of the book the two weave into one in a way which I hope is very fruitful. I think strangely enough there is a definite relationship between Crash the Bus and that wonderfully strange book Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, which I remember reading when I was at university donkeys years ago. Crash the Bus is much more accessible, much shorter than Zen and the Art of. Its philosophical attitude and approach is much more accessible, I think and hope. But in the sense that it sometimes veers off into a consideration of what's going on in the book, it could be said to bear some relationship with Zen and the Art of, and certainly I think it's an interesting mode to adopt. I certainly found it very fulfilling to be able to veer, as it were, the bus between exciting narrative of the story, and suddenly think, hold on a minute, let's get off the bus here and just think about what we just said or experienced there a bit. So to a certain extent, yes, it does bear relationship to that wonderfully odd book. A particular audience, I think pardon me, the book's as strange as I am in a way, I think. I don't want to make myself sound like a weirdo or anything, but I think looking over the pattern of my own life, as I now am at 57, coming to be an old boy on the foothills of senility and old age, that I'm a strange mixture of the flippant and the grave, the comedic and the tragic, and I'm always trying to sort of fuse those together into some sort of arrangement whereby they can be bedfellows in the same personality, if that makes any sense at all. So that the sort of reader that I hope to appeal to is somebody who is prepared to enjoy levity and lightness of heart, and even occasional sort of Shakespearean bawdy, one might say, but also to suddenly flip quite seriously into some quite not austere, that's the wrong word, and not grave, but mature, penetrating, honest assessments of where one is in life, with no frills, you know, warts and all, I suppose you could say, without sort of indulging in any sort of moral ugliness or psychological sewer just for the sake of it. So obviously an intelligent reader, a full-hearted reader, a comedic reader, a reader with the same sort of sensibility as me, really, because I don't regard my sensibility as extraordinary in any degree. I'm just a human being like any other human being. I have a superficial side, I have a profound side, but I indulge both of them to the hilt in Crash the Bus. But the superficial sides of levity and comedy are elegantly written. I will say that much for them, and it's not just a sort of carry-on bawdy. It's a clever Shakespearean bawdy. I hope, at least that's the plan. It was wonderful to write. It was a joy to write Crash the Bus. It sort of liberated something in me that was quite a revelation to me in a way, because with the writing of poetry, one goes through a very narrow door, and slightly wider with plays, But with a novel, almost anything is possible. The door is very wide. You actually find, once you're in the room, that there are very definite proportions and lineaments to the elegance of the form, the room that you're writing in. But initially, I don't know whether this analogy even makes any sense, but it sort of does. When you start writing prose, you are just say almost pretty much the first thing that comes into your heart or head. And if you have any artistic talent, that will then begin to take you in a certain direction. Your thoughts will assume an elegance almost naturally. And I found that with a lot of the book, it was literally writing me. I don't want to sound pretentious when I say that, but it had a life of its own. So it would wander off wherever it wanted at times, but wherever it wanted always tended to be in the right direction, and I had a kind of faith and trust in that to as it were have its own authority. And looking back at a lot of what I seem to have written, it was a wonderful experience, a lovely experience, and one I'd like to replicate, perhaps with something else later on. And also, of course, prose becomes poetry in the sense that the images are enlivened, they're dynamic. If, as I say, one has any literary talent, the sentences have a lyricism. There's no difference between prose in that sense and poetry. I mean, poetry obviously doesn't have to rhyme anymore in an A-B. It hasn't done for 100 years. But Baudelaire wrote the most beautiful prose poems, and to a certain extent I think that there is a kind of prose poetry in Crash the Bus, which I hope will come out when I read some. It was a lovely experience, that's all I can say. I'd be delighted to read you 3 extracts which I've chosen, and they're kind of representative of the different stages that the main protagonist goes through, and they're not particularly long pieces, but I'd love to read them to you. And the first one is towards the beginning of the book, where our hero, whose name is Matt Grant, is reflecting on his time in the bank with a friend of his at the time of dubious repute called Ronnie. This happens to be chapter 10. Chapter 10, it's called Geld macht frei, or Money Sets You Free. What is it about offices? Can the mere influence of a physical environment induce nausea over time? If one's mind drinks in too much steel and glass, does it make one cold and clinical inside? I particularly came to hate the toweringly expensive houseplants, and even more massively expensive, trashy, abstract, so-called modern art. What exactly is modern about it, by the way, with which the bank affected to mask its clinically minimalist entrance hall? Not that such trivial irritations contributed one whit to my leaving the bank, nor did I suffer any guilt about the money I made. Far from it. I could stand the cash, or so I thought. Then again, maybe the cash couldn't stand me. Maybe that was it. Maybe behind my back, money had taken a pathological dislike to me and was plotting to kill me. Money is cunning. It masks itself in moral support, whilst all the time it's plotting against you behind your back. No. Geld macht frei, it should have said, above the swanky swing doors as we traipsed into work, into our concentration camp of money each day. Were we then guards or inmates? Either way, our souls seemed starved of a certain kind of nourishment. Our faces thin and grey, our uniforms too were pinstriped. Our crucial difference being one of pain. We felt none. Take Ronnie again, only for a while, I promise you. Ronnie in the desk right next to me. In all his stereotypical Latin womanizing glory, Ronnie didn't mind being a stereotype. In fact, he loved it. He was so good at it after all, and for better or worse, we all love the things we're good at, whether it's shorting stock, meditating, masturbating, holding dinner parties, torturing prison inmates. In fact, Ronnie was so stereotypical, he had taken stereotypicality to new levels of excellence, whereby he was no longer stereotypical at all. Rubber Ronnie! Never at a loss for a prophylactic when the moment came, and he made sure it did at least twice a week, he claimed, and never with the same girl twice. Look at her, what a babe! And that one, begging for it, Ronnie would assure me, gazing out through the cafe's picture windows at the human cinema of unsuspecting women unreeling before his eyes over coffee. You don't know what you're missing, mate. Don't I, Ronnie? Forget monogamy. Muslims have got it right. Men are naturally polygamous. There's an army of them out there. Women, I mean, not Muslims. That doesn't mean to say you have to surrender to them, Ronnie, I would remonstrate. Incidentally, I can recommend remonstrating. It's an alternative to masturbating, subtler and more psychologically rewarding, though sadly equally addictive. No, seriously, bottom line, women want sex as much, if not more, than men. They love it. Ronnie thus communicated the ancient fact of woman's delight in her own sexuality as a modern road to Damascus epiphany. But then, as William Blake the poet knew, though we as individuals may pass through them temporarily, states of mind themselves are timeless. In this regard, Ronnie's magically dated back to post-war decades, when the revelation of woman's capacity for sexual pleasure still possessed the power of taboo. That's where I come in. I answer woman's prayers. We know, Ronnie, you're a god. You know that lovely girl, Lola, the one in Futures, the one that said she wasn't interested? Yes, Ronnie, I know Lola in Futures. Job done. Tits like watermelons. Has she indeed? Actually, I knew this to be true, because one hot night after work last summer, during one of those rare magical weeks when a Mediterranean wind blows up from the south and suddenly London can be mistaken for Palermo or Madrid, Lola had drunken occasion to set her watermelon stall out privately before me after closing time, and I had equally drunkenly refreshed myself thereat. Do I then snigger like a schoolboy, resort to sexist objectifications of Lola, descend to making vulgar fun of the traditional seaside picture postcard target of Lola's wonderful big tits? Far from it. Lola was voluptuous both mentally and physically. She deserved a better lover than me, certainly than Ronnie. My modest point is that Lola's watermelons had indeed been so dauntingly generous in their proportions that one scarcely knew how to acquit oneself of the task of taking each of them in hand, taking comprehensive care of each of them in turn, as it were, without leaving either feeling neglected. Lola's breasts were, when all is said and done, the work of two men. That said, undermined as I was, I did my level best to please in difficult circumstances. The human heart being a pendulum, pleasure swings swiftly back towards guilt, at least in my grandfather clock. Subsequently, Lola and I had thought it best to keep our brief tropical transaction of said watermelon secret. Though our mutual sensitivity had not prevented our comfortably illicit union in the first place, we both had partners we didn't want to hurt unnecessarily. In this context, guilt can be an adhesive that bonds together the fractured pieces of romance. Ah, what is it about one-night stands that chills one to the bone? Is lust always ultimately overridden by a desire for the intimacy of love? Is it the corpse-like contact with a stranger's skin that makes one run from the graveyard bed of lust back to the comparative warmth of hearth and home, even if the living soul one dwells with there is not so warm as once she was? Kate, whom I'd known on and off since I was 16, loved me, and I loved her, but in our affair, and separately beknownst to both of us, the time of secrets had begun. Secrets. Their existence cuts both ways, can kill the truth or keep it alive. In Ronnie's case, secrets were indispensable to the survival of human dignity. Let me tell you, mate, Lola loves it when you... Ronnie, I've got a call to make, mate. What is it about other people's sexual prowess? Why do they think you want to know? I don't even want to know about my own. But of course, money is the great aphrodisiac, and the city is the arena of sexual prowess. Everywhere you turn there is some mighty warrior or Amazon ready to regale others with tales of their victories over the opposite sex. The women are, so I'm told, no better. Indeed, at the top of the tree, the bitch goddess herself, Naomi Hunter, queen of credit default swaps, including an option on yours. Are you man enough? Fortunately not. But I'm running ahead of myself. This is a small chapter called Into the Forest, and it has relationship to mothers, this idea that a mother can be quite a destructive element in one's life. It was for my friend, she was for my friend, and he would seek refuge in the forest as he was growing up, and this is a chapter that deals with that. Into the Forest. No doubt one of the reasons Mother couldn't have cared less about my experience was that she was too busy having her own hallucinations. I ought to have known better. I'd had a lifetime to get used to these. Junkies aren't always bad company. If they get their fix, they're fine, so long as you keep an eye on the clock. When I was a kid, during those halcyon hours when the syringe had just done its work, Mother could occasionally be very loving. She might tell me to come close and stroke my hair, or whisper blurred maternal affections, call me her knight in armour. One birthday I'd been bought a silver plastic suit of the stuff and proudly wore it for just a few months too long, when some kid laughed at it and I never put it on again. It's a chilling moment in life when you realise others have just seen right through your disguise. Of course, coming down from a high was quite another matter. Sometimes when things got especially bad with Mother, I'd retreat into a nearby wood with the little terrier I'd been given by one of her blokes. Actually, in doing this, I was following the one piece of decent advice Mother ever gave me. Take that fucking dog and get out of my sight, she would sagely counsel. So I did. No doubt the dog reminded her of Johnny, her useless bloke at the time. Johnny was a traveller, not that he ever seemed to travel very far, Bala marking the outer limit of his bucolic vagabondage, as I recall. But Johnny I liked. He always had a pack of dogs in train, and had given me this one, unpeeling its lead from the fistful he held in his hand. Like a little canine balloon, the dog floated off in my childish hand. Such is the skyward fate of man's best friend. Scarcely less at the behest of the god of circumstance myself, I would drift with my beloved dog into the nearby wood. Forests are cool. I mean literally, well, metaphorically too, of course. Forests occupy a special place in the hearts of men and women. In forests, everything cools down, slows down. In forests, you come upon the time to be yourself, whatever or whoever that is or proves to be. In the forest, I would think about Mother, how much I hated her, how much I wanted not to be with her. And then, slowly, intangibly and invisibly, by dint of the forest's mysterious powers of distraction and abstraction, my hurt would disappear. Play heals. Not just actual childish play, the floating of paper boats, the building of dams and bridges made out of stones and twigs, which, like any child, I loved, but as my teens wore on into adulthood, their mature imaginary equivalents, the mind's play and the heart's ease therein. In the forest, the unthreatened play of thoughts and feelings brings the spirits out. Everything comes closer. Like fallow deer, one's deepest instincts and emotions scent one out, sniff the air for a true sight and sound of who one is. So too one's most intimate sentiments, for so long affrighted by the noise one makes in the outer world, so long menaced by the sight of one's own face, approach and enter into a ring of subtle confidence. In the forest one thus becomes a kind of hermit at the centre of one's own mystic world, a universe in which nothing is excluded, and all things are related to each other by a common bond of empathy, the tacitly accepted reflection in each other's eyes. In the forest, no one and nothing is afraid to look each other in the eyes. Is this the poet's world? Is this where poetry comes from? That sense of power and peacefulness commingled. Of course, such a forest need not be geographical. It may be anywhere you feel at peace. Maybe in the high street or the city square. Maybe in the eyes of the beloved you accidentally meet. In this sense, the poet's fallow deer may wander unnoticed and unharmed, protected by the aura of their own peacefulness in the raucous midnight urban street. Of course, I couldn't stay in my actual forest forever, not all day, and certainly not all cold night long. I had to go home, where I would usually find Mother fast asleep, lying in a stupor on the sofa, with the TV switched on, holding a conversation with itself. If it was daytime, the TV would be talking to itself about antiques, or holding a melodramatic dialogue between some girlfriend and boyfriend before rushing out in tears to the tune of soap opera. Or at night the television might be brooding silently, as trivially intense men sat gleaming around a spotlit table playing poker in the televised darkness. I always felt strangely attracted to that green baize table. It stood like a small green clearing of hopefulness amid the cluttered chaos of Mother's life, a miniature echo of the purity of the forest I'd just left. To this day, if I'm driving, to see shafts of sunlight stripe the dark forest trees with swathes of gold causes me a kind of beautiful pain. Sometimes I have to stop the car and walk a while, just to clear my mind of memories of Mother and be at ease again. The last bit I'd like to read for you is towards the end of the book, when Matt, our central character, our protagonist, comes back to his wife, and it deals with his decision to do that, and her reception of him, and all that sort of thing. So it's called Flocks of Wild Parrots in London. And so I moved from grief to its calm opposite, contentment, and from east to west across London. I settled in a B&B in Richmond, near the Great Park, for a few weeks. There are flocks of wild parrots in this wealthy suburban reach of London, this green neck of its asphalt woods. Suddenly emerging from the unseen into the seen, they fleck the dawn and dusk with minor meteoric streaks of green, hundreds of them, Jackson Pollocking our grey capital in the colours of their paradise, reinterpreting it in the name of a spirit perhaps never before seen, purposeless, unconfined delight. The parrots we hear escaped from pet cages over the decades, gradually establishing themselves in the climate, laying claim to an exotic, indeed quixotic existence in a cageless capital of suburban sky, wherein they now thrive, and whence they threaten to invade London's concrete heart. I used to go to a particular spot and just watch them fly around my head, like St. Francis without the holiness. I liked the parrots' utter impossibility, the fact of their profoundly happy inappropriateness. They were both in and out of place, and thus, birds of a feather, they flew, the tutelary spirits of my new state of mind. To this day I cannot bear to see any bird caged. The hands, old or young, that set them there, and the voices that coo, though their love be couched in sentimental terms, never can be kind. When I rang Kate for the first time after a few months, of course I was prepared for her anger. Ironically, her equanimity disarmed me, and my eyes welled up with tears. "So you didn't die then?" she inquired, softly and satirically. I wanted to, but couldn't laugh. What is guilt at its best? A powerful force for atonement, a positive desire for expiation, the removal of an obstacle that lies in the way of shared happiness. Having rolled away the stone and risen Lazarus-like from my tomb in Beckenham, there was now another standing stone to move between Kate and me. But in fact it was already too late. Someone else had moved it, and in so doing, moved in with her. His name was Alan. Old-fashioned somehow. Actually, he was 15 years older than Kate. But a decade or so is not long in the life of a son, and he was the source of the occasional sunlight I had seen her standing in from time to time during the long months of my descent into the gloomy shades following the event in Auckland Avenue. "Do you love him?" I asked, reading woodenly from the rejected lover's script. "Of course not. But he's kind," she replied, turning the page over. "He's away on business in Paris at the moment," she added, as if the fact was somehow connected to his kindness. "He wouldn't mind us meeting." "Why not?" I retorted with childish, chauvinistic irony. "Because he's sure of my feelings. Lucky man." "So what's the point in my coming over?" "Don't know. You could cook me something if you want. Come and burn something in my best saucepan." "Sounds like a euphemism," I replied, immediately wishing I hadn't. Kate was generous enough to utter a modest, momentary laugh. I can't deny it was almost a relief to find that Kate had secretly moved to love's inherently Mediterranean climate in the months that I had gradually abandoned her. You can gradually abandon someone. It's not a contradiction in terms. The withdrawal of love in this way is like a British summer's day, when, slowly but surely, the sun clouds over and the promising day ends in gloom. In this context, why would Kate not have looked to make a move to the sun when I was nowhere to be seen, was determined to be lost, had been lost in northern shadow? No, I would go round and overcook her beans and sausages any time she wanted. Indeed, her comparative equanimity in the face of such a simple menu was more than I had a right to expect, and eased my sense of guilt at wishing to reclaim my life. Yes, Jonah, having escaped from the belly of the whale that was Beckenham, for so long lost at sea on an ocean of existential amnesia, was now returning to reclaim his kingdom, his right to live a life with feelings I could recognise, not as personal possessions, not as mine in any lasting, permanent sense. I now knew there was no such thing as forever, especially where anything as transient as feelings are concerned, but rather as experiences that were there to be enjoyed however fleeting. Enjoy the baked beans while ye may, for tomorrow we must wash up burned saucepans. I told Kate about my love of Beckenham. She inquired with her customary detachment and objectivity and perhaps a hint of acid. What did you expect? It's a suburban shithole. What indeed? Certainly not what I got. And I tried to tell Kate about that, about the species of living death I had endured. But Kate only fell quiet. What could she say? What a clever boy you are to die and come back to life all on your own. Do it again for Mummy. She asked me what had made me come back again. I said I'd had a dream. What, like Martin Luther King? She inquired. Yes, but without the charisma or the cultural implications, I replied. Kate doesn't necessarily believe our dreams mean anything. She prefers to think they're just twitches of our sleepless neurons. But if they are, why do the impulses take the unique shapes they do? Why do they seem to know just who we are better than we do? I told Kate that if the dream of the cliff and the kid with the bike had meant anything, it was that I had to accept that I was no longer a child, that everything that had gone before was over eternally, that there is only the quality, or lack of it, of the current moment, with each of us standing on the cliff edge of each moment, that to be human is to be only alive right now. Only. Why do I use that word? How long is now? Now is eternal because it's always here. We are a conduit for life's electricity. We are lightning conductors. Life strikes us, passes through us into the earth, and we are the earth we stand upon. We are both energy and form, spontaneity and consequence, journey and destination, ritual and realization. Now is all there is, ever. Even when we reflect on the past or envisage the future, we're still doing it now. In this sense, perhaps the past and future are ghosts or prophets of the present moment. They add their power to its drama. Indeed, if life is a drama, perhaps we have only to recognize and realize the dramatic power inherent in the momentary plot twists of our lives. That night, Kate was unfaithful to Alan. Ruthlessly, as she lay in my arms, I thought of him and shed no tears.